Public Affairs very much thanks Residco, our sole corporate underwriter, for helping to make the production of this show possible.
Welcome to Public Affairs from the February 28 Chicago mayoral election. Ted Dabrowski. Crime has been skyrocketing now for a long time, still skyrocketing. What has to be done to stop that skyrocketing crime in Chicago?
Yeah, no, we're hearing a lot about adding to the police force, and that's probably one thing that has to be done, but there's so much more that has to be done, and it has to do with the morale of the policemen. We have to improve the morale. We have to actually arrest people. We have to then prosecute them, and we have to make sure we sentence them. And that whole chain has fallen apart, and we're seeing more and more criminals go back on the streets. We've decriminalized crime, and we're treating the criminals like victims. So we have to unwind all that, and that's a big process. It's not about just having more policemen on the street.
And that's what we're hearing from most of the 9 candidates, maybe all of, and counting the incumbent, Lightfoot. All we're hearing is more police.
Yeah,
right?
Because we got 1,600 less police than we did about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So it's a big, big drop, right? And so, yes, there's a feeling that we should add more policemen, but we can add more police, but if we add more police to a failing system, it won't do any good. It's just like the Chicago public schools. Put more money into it, but the system has failed, it won't be any better. So we have to improve our policing, we have to improve our sentencing, we have to improve what Judge Tim Evans is doing, what Kim Foxx is doing. The Safety Act creates a lot of problems as well. For example, it allows the anonymous complaints of policemen. How are you going to have good morale when the Safety Act is doing that? Every one of these candidates should be attacking those kind of things that destroy police morale.
Yeah, and we're taping, I say, on the 20th. On the 19th, a major debate from ABC 7 in conjunction with League of Women Voters, and they didn't really do that. None of the candidates said what you just said about this kind of reform, this kind of change, right?
Yeah, it's hard for them to say it because it goes against this whole equity discussion we should have. For example, we've stopped foot chases, we've stopped car chases. We're allowing anonymous complaints. We're letting these dangerous people take over our streets. There's a host of things that we are putting more and more people on electronic monitoring. These are very dangerous people. So a whole host of things that are happening that they didn't talk about because it goes counter to the equity message. So they're a little bit stuck. They want, right? So they want to, in theory, they want to see more a safer Chicago, but they don't want to take the steps to do that.
Why? What's the equity message that's blocking them from saying the kinds of things you just said?
Well, we're talking about releasing more and more people. You go all the way to the Safety Act. We're going to release a lot more violent defendants back into the streets. I think a good example of what's happened in Chicago, and this is Tim Evans making the bail reform much looser, or the bail much looser. And so, for example, 4 years ago in 2018, my colleague Matt Rosenberg at Wirepoints, he itemized how many people on average were out on electronic monitoring on a given day in 2018. About 16 people who were attempted murder or murder. 16 accused of attempted murder or murder were out on a daily basis out on the streets, electronic monitoring. Now it's 125 or something like, over
125
right,
accused of murder.
Accused of. So you got many more people on electronic monitoring out on the streets. And we're seeing what happens, right? CWB does a great job of covering what happens. Now that was just for murder and attempted murder. You take in all these other violent crimes and you're talking about 1,500 people a day who are out on electronic monitoring who at any point could do damage to other people. And we see it happening quite a bit. So this lax treatment of criminals, and we're talking about violent offenders, reoffenders, felons, they're back on the street, or at least they're out of jail, and they're doing heinous crimes again. And nobody wants to talk about that, right? Nobody wants to talk about, how they treat a robbery.
Well, why isn't Lori Lightfoot? She's the incumbent. She's been there for 4 years. Why won't she talk about it?
Well, she can't talk about the mess that's been under her watch. Look, she said the other night, it's better. Crime is not better. You have a 41% increase in crimes this year in 2022 over 2021. So despite the fact that we're 2 years removed from more than 2 years removed from George Floyd. We're removed from COVID. We still had more crimes. This is an amazing stat. We had 21,000 car thefts in Chicago in 2022. 21,000. That's a 100% increase. So each one of those thefts is a potential violent crime if we're not careful, right? Carjackings also were up. So we have massive crime, and murders were down 14%.
So that's one category.
Right. However, under her watch, since she started back in 2019, they're up some 33%.
Right.
The murders are still up under her watch from when she started to today. So she can talk about a 1-year decline in murders, but crime is up across the board since she took office.
Yeah, because homicides, they came down this year to 687 in Chicago. And
well, they'll be around 700 when it's all tallied up.
But and last year it was 800. So she's right. It's down about 14%. But if you go back to 2019 when she came in, homicides were
less than 500.
Yeah. So it's been 200 increase under her watch.
Yeah, so it can't be.
Nobody said that really very forcefully last night at the debate.
You've got 250 kids under the age of 18 that have been killed in the last 4 years. So it's not just that kind of crime. It's a crime that's spilled into drive-by shootings of young kids, people in their homes. It's a bigger mess than just what we're saying. They're treating the criminals like victims. Okay? What they're forgetting is that the victims in Chicago, as the victimization goes up, the true victims, they're minorities. 95% of all homicides in Chicago are either black or Hispanic. So when they're lax on crime, the people that they pretend they're protecting, right, are the ones who are getting more violated, right? We're talking in terms of homicides and other. The problem we're having in Chicago is not crime, it's not education, it's not the people leaving. The problem is we have this ideology, we don't care about the individual anymore. We don't care about merit. We don't care about achievement. It's all about political, identity politics, racial politics. We've gotten away from demanding good results and measuring results and metrics and things like that. They don't matter anymore. And so, again, if you look at all the stuff we're talking about, that's what they should be talking about. But they won't look at this data because it doesn't suit them. Right? So it's all about the woke ideology, racial justice, and et cetera, when in fact, all the policies are really hurting even more the blacks and the Hispanics. My colleague Matt Rosenberg's done some really good work on showing how the bail reform under Evans has been a mess. And you've had 15,000 people released who committed felonies after they were released. Of those, about nearly 3,000 did violent acts. Nearly 1,600 had weapons offenses. You're talking about people that are getting out, this is the metrics, people that are getting back out on the streets and commit crimes again. The big thing, and Matt's right to point it out, that we don't measure is the judges. Let's start monitoring them as well. How lenient are they? What happens when they let people back out? There are no metrics on
because Tim
on
Evans
that. Talking about the candidates, they should be demanding that we need more transparency from what the judges are deciding. The public should know what those judges are deciding because they should be held accountable.
That's a state law. That's a state law, right?
Sure. But again,
so they should be demanding that from the governor, from the legislators, Democrats and Republicans, from everybody, right?
You're right, because these people running for mayor, this is Chicago. Chicago has power, of course.
Right.
They should be demanding this of state lawmakers, of course. So these are big deals that are ignored, and you wouldn't have heard any of that in that debate yesterday.
Yeah, and you mentioned education, so let's go there. We're going there halfway into our show, sort of. We'll see. But last night, as I say, again, last night means January 19th, debate. You watched the debate. How much time was spent on education?
None.
Zero.
No,
None.
there wasn't a true education question.
You tell me what is wrong with CPS and the Chicago schools and education in Chicago, and what do you do to fix it?
Let's be clear. Chicago Public Schools is now a minority school, right? Only 10% of CPS is now white. A small percentage are now Asian. So it's overwhelmingly black and Hispanic.
Right.
So when we talk about results here, we're talking about minority results. What people need to understand is that just 1 out of every 10 kids at Chicago Public Schools, blacks, of the black children, only 1 out of every 10 can read at grade level. That means 9 out of 10 can't read at grade level. And we're talking about through the whole system. And then in math, it's 1 out of 20 that can do math at grade level.
1 out of 20 can do math.
Right. So
for
90
black. And what's it like for Hispanics?
Similar, a little bit better, but similar.
A little less than 2 out of 10 on Hispanics for reading, and like 1 out of 10 for Hispanics for doing math at a proficient level.
And it's been this way for 50 years.
Right.
Right. And nobody,
even under Paul Vallas, who made improvements,
nobody does anything about this. You know, the Good Times, if you remember the show with JJ, Good Times, 1974, a show was done about how they just move kids through the system, even if they can't read.
What's causing that failure by CPS for a half a century?
Well, the only thing I can come down to is nobody cares. If you look at the data, the kids are automatically moved through the system.
Wait a second, just stop there. Lightfoot doesn't care, Garcia doesn't care, Vallas doesn't care, Wilson doesn't care.
I'm not talking about the candidates, I'm talking about who's in charge, right?
No, just stop for a second. Since no candidate raised this, let's hang him. I mean, Vallas has talked about school choice. He's talked about fixing these schools by saying every kid should have a choice. Did he say that last night?
Well, none of them did, right? None of them did.
Well, I'm just saying, I said all 5 of them did. I could say all 9 of them didn't.
No, you can't just base everything on the debate, right? Okay. They should have taken, whoever's should have taken advantage of it.
What do you know about those 5 key candidates, one of whom is likely to win, extremely likely? What do you know about them in school choice? Is school choice important?
Absolutely. It's the only way to fix the Chicago public schools. There have to be many more options, and school choice has to be the driver.
And what do you mean when you say school choice?
Vouchers, education savings accounts. Yeah, I'll give you this.
Charters.
Let's make sure we understand the statistics, right? We said 1 out of 10 black kids. We said can't read only 1 out of 10 can read at grade level. Only 1 out of 20 can do math at grade level. They're passed on automatically. They're graduating at record levels, even though they can't read at grade level or do math at grade level. The teachers in 2020 and 2021, were rated at near 100%, all of them proficient or excellent, despite those facts that I just told you. Many of those schools are called commendable by the State Board of Education. Commendable means a positive thing. The kids can't read. It's a system, and the average salary now for teachers $86,000.
Yeah, so, and the average pension is what?
$75,000
for teachers. So they're walking away with when they retire at 55, their payouts in the $2 to $3 million, right?
Right. But the point is,
for what? For what? Did they do their job?
It's a systemic issue. The whole thing is a system.
What's causing it? What's causing it? If you had to say it in 2 or 3 words.
It's overwhelming union power.
What union? Teachers union, right?
Chicago
CTU?
Teachers, yeah, Chicago Teachers Union. You don't have to ask, right? You just say it. Chicago Teachers Union.
Yeah, okay.
So that's the problem. They are the most militant, toxic to kids union in the country. And so, and do me a favor.
When you say militant, what does that mean?
They will strike. They've struck 4 times in the last decade, roughly. They don't care about these results. You don't see now, and you've got some people who've been running this thing, right? You got of the candidates. You got Lori Lightfoot, who's been running CPS now for 4 years, and you've got Brandon Johnson of the CTU. So
what do you mean of the CTU? He's got the endorsement this time of the CTU.
Yeah,
Chuy Garcia had the endorsement of CTU in 2015. So these guys, Garcia and Brandon, are kind of wedded to all of these policies.
Yeah,
would you say that?
These are all these policies, long-term policies, and I don't see them. If I were to see a leader saying this system is broke, it doesn't work, and Vallas has done some of that, or a good bit of that actually. He's taken on the unions, at least, on
he
Facebook
has said
and things
that,
like
right?
that. Yeah.
He has said that.
He's recognized
taken on the teachers union.
He's recognized in some way that the unions have too much power, and the parents have no power.
And what's his solution?
What
is the main? It's school choice, right?
Yeah.
Paul Vallas identifies and say, we need to give every kid, that's what he said, I think I'm quoting him, every kid in Chicago a choice, just like the more wealthy people have a choice to opt out and go to a private school that performs, right? Am I getting that right?
That's right, yeah.
Is that Paul Vallas?
He's been supportive of school choice as far as I've known him, yes.
It's not a current thing. It's been 5 years ago, 10 years ago. He did it in Louisiana. He did it all over. He pushed. In fact, last night they raised it. Somebody criticized him and said, I think it was Brandon Johnson who said, right, what did he helped prevent privatization. And he said Paul Vallas was trying to do that when he was there with charter schools. Paul's proud of that. Brandon Johnson is critical of that. Voila, we now have an issue, which was ignored last night because somebody decided not to debate that issue. Okay?
Yeah, and it's a huge issue. It should not be left untouched.
But there's a remedy for every problem. February 9th, if I've got that date right, another debate scheduled, Union League Club, I think 6 p.m., be televised by Foxx. Mike Flannery will be there. I think we can depend on Mike to raise this issue, you think?
I don't know. I don't want to get to the
somebody
debates.
needs to raise this issue.
Yeah, debates no longer make sense. No, I think the candidates...
You don't think it matters?
Hang on, Jeff. I think the candidates need to raise the issue.
They do. Okay.
They've got the top 4, the top 5 have enough earned media potential. They have a way to get into the media. They should raise it. And if we're happy to join anybody who wants to talk about the failure of these school districts.
Who's we?
The school districts.
Who's we? Wirepoints,
yeah,
Public
Wirepoints,
Affairs, everybody.
Wirepoints.
They got anytime any candidate, certainly those top 5, want to come here and be interviewed and talk about this issue, come on. Bring it on, folks. We didn't treat you fairly. You come tell me.
And I give you the perfect example of the control is we did a report on the, 1/3 of Chicago public schools are more than half empty. So you take all those schools that they have, nearly 500, whatever the big number is, 1/3 of them are half empty. And then not only that,
more than half empty.
And then take a whole bunch of the bottom ones, they are only 5% full. So
you remember some of these? Go ahead.
So Manly High School has capacity of like 1,300 students. It's only going to have like 60 students. It is empty.
It's less than 5%, right?
Yes, less than 5%. And the important point is that of those kids who are there, none of them can read. Like the reading,
0% reading at grade level, right?
And you always have the same number of employees as students. It's almost like if it were a one-to-one tutoring service.
So yeah, some of those schools were the cost is $58,000 per student at some of the schools,
and
right?
Jeff, what was amazing about, we did that report, and Mike, you just mentioned Mike Flannery. Mike Flannery had me on the show to talk about that report. He invited the Chicago Teachers Union to be on the show to discuss the issue.
His show, Flannery Fired Up.
And if you watch his show, he will, and we have it on our website, but basically he said that the union said to us, F Wirepoints. And they didn't say F Wirepoints, they used the full word. And so that's how, when I said militant, that's how they treat this problem, the plight of these kids. They tell people who are providing and it's their own data. We're not using our own data. We're using the Chicago Teachers Union and Chicago Public Schools data. And they're telling us to,
This is the kind of stuff they focus on.
This is the problem. If you ask me about what I want to see from the candidates, the number one thing is somebody to reject the identity politics game. Because we have to be demanding of all Chicagoans. I don't care what color they are, right? We have to intervene. If kids can't read in the 3rd grade, as most of the Chicago public schools kids can't, we should intervene and be all over them and help them get to reading proficiency by 4th grade. Instead, we just move them on.
So we have to promote excellence.
We have to promote merit, excellence, achievement, and get rid of this whole identity politics, which nobody can measure. And Lori Lightfoot, and not just Lori, but Pritzker and Preckwinkle, all of them, all they do is throw equity and these buzzwords into their
diversity,
into their budgets, into their contracts, and it takes away from really thinking about how to improve the crime numbers, how to improve the education numbers. So it has to be a totally different ballgame. And what you heard last night in the debate was more of equity. It doesn't work.
This is popular. School choice, as I understand it, polling from Illinois Policy Institute and others, very popular in the African American community, however you want to put it, Ms. Press Secretary for Governor Pritzker, in the African American community, in the Black community, very popular in the Hispanic community, want to say Latino community, whatever you want to say. Those minorities eat this up because they know it's their only ticket out of the 10%, kids learning how to read.
Well, I think what a lot of parents, not just in Chicago but across the nation, figured out is when the unions have so much power that they can shut down schools, keep them closed, force remote learning, which didn't work. A lot of the children lost. I mean, many, especially the low-income children, lost, year and a half, 2 years of education.
Who pushed that policy? Or you can go back to COVID.
Well, who pushed that policy?
Just go back because COVID was around for 2 years of Lori's 4-year policy, 4-year tenure, maybe longer. She had certain policies. Give it to me in a nutshell. How do you rate Lori Lightfoot on her COVID policies with respect to education? Did he shut down in-person learning? Did she do that with the unions?
Absolutely, because, and not just her, but Pritzker and others, they have, what's the right word? They have allowed the unions to have this much power.
Lost learning a year or two. Kids who weren't learning how to read at grade level before it got worse. Is that, again, something Chuy Garcia should be talking about? Paul Vallas, is Paul Vallas talking about? I think he was, right?
Yeah, you know, closed schools. I mean, that should be one of the biggest issues.
Right.
Union power. Should the unions have so much power at the expense of parents, at the expense of kids, to keep them locked out? And nobody's talking about that. Not only that, Jeff, Amendment 1, right? Amendment 1 gives the unions even more power.
It's going to be harder.
And this is a problem, again, it starts at the top, it comes on down. Why aren't the candidates complaining about Amendment 1? Why aren't they defending the parents and saying that the union has too much power? And you won't hear it.
Yeah, well, look.
I think Vallas is the only one. Now, let's give Willie Wilson some credit too. Willie Wilson, has said, get rid of all these regulations. He's a man of few words, but he has says, we got to reduce this crime, we got to improve education, and get rid of the red tape.
He said, take the handcuffs off the police, let them do policing, and put the handcuffs on the criminals. He said, look, you referred to this foot chase policy. Cops have to stop when their superintendent says, you're chasing, stop, let them go. You know what Willie Wilson said on that debate on January 19th? He said, hunt them down, hunt those perps down, especially if there's a murder and you're chasing a perp for murder, hunt them down like rabbits, okay? Was he right, Ted?
Well, they've got to have the ability to chase bad guys, right? If not...
Like rabbits.
If not, Jeff, if not, then people know they can steal and they're not going to be chased down, whether it's in a car or whether it's by a policeman. And that, again, incentivizes, we've incentivized crime, right? When we raised the minimum threshold for felony from whatever it was, $250 or $300 to $1,000, right? So if you steal something less than $1,000, it's no longer a felony. We've incentivized crime.
It's the broken glass theory all over again 30 years ago. It's why New York now Chicago has 5 times the homicide rate, I believe, of New York, 3 times of LA, because both LA and New York bought into decades ago broken glass theory. When you let the small things go, the big things start appearing more and more. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you got it right, and I think and it's precisely what we've done.
Right, and we haven't mentioned property taxes. It takes a quick minute at least. We should do more. It was discussed in the debate on January 19th. Everybody said they lamented high property taxes. But I don't think anybody said, what's the root of the
Jeff,
problem?
let me get
what's
that right.
the root of the problem?
Look,
how do you lower property taxes?
Look, we've raised property taxes a lot. And I say we, Rahm Emanuel raised property taxes. Lori Lightfoot has raised property taxes. They've tied it to inflation now. The real problem is, again, what's the big cost of government? Labor, pensions. So as long as these unions, all those unions have all those powers, constitutional powers now, guaranteed pensions, as long as they have that and the ordinary Chicagoans don't, you're going to have this huge disconnect, and that's why property taxes are so high.
Well, isn't the major component, well, you mentioned people, pensions, but of course the major thing that partly leads to higher pensions are higher salaries, especially for the teachers' unions, for the teachers, right? I mean, isn't something like 60%, this is not just in Chicago, but across the board, 60% of the property taxes people pay are attributable to school education spending, K through 12.
That's right.
Am I right?
That's right.
So if you want to do something about property taxes, and you
have to focus on education. If you focus on education, you have to focus on labor. And if you look at, and something we've done, and again, this is another point, they all keep talking about investments, these candidates. We looked at Chicago public schools pay. When you compare to the 150 largest school districts in the country, Chicago teachers are number 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on what you're measuring, highest. So they're the top.
Who negotiated? Well, and Lightfoot essentially negotiated the teachers contract of, what was it, 2020?
It's the largest.
It goes for 4 years, goes through 20. What does it do?
Biggest CTU contract ever, massive raises, massive hires, and again, more expenses, which means higher property taxes.
So that is, you could call Lori Lightfoot Ms. High Property Tax, right? Because that's her baby. She's the person responsible for high property tax.
Okay, now you have to go further. But you can't only give it to her, right? Because
who else?
Well,
The guys who, the people who support the teachers'
Take the
unions?
pension problems from before, right? So Rahm Emanuel has a piece of it. You have to keep going back because it is the worst pension crisis in the country among big cities. But she's made it worse.
I don't hear Garcia and I don't hear Brandon Johnson saying what we got to do is start controlling teacher salaries and teachers' pensions.
No, they won't
want
talk
to go
about that.
higher, right?
Well, they want to go higher. They can't say they're going to want to lower it.
And Lightfoot certainly doesn't want to say that.
No.
So then it comes down to Vallas. Is Vallas the only guy? Is Vallas saying that? You got to control those pensions, and you especially got to control those teacher salaries. Is he saying that? We'll find out.
We'll see what he says. I think Willie Wilson would probably say the same thing.
Okay, so those two guys of the top five. Look, I don't
expect that the others, because the others are I think deeply embedded in the system.
Well, I just say I haven't mentioned much, maybe not at all. Alderman Rod Sawyer, who's involved in this race, Alderman Sophia King, State Rep Cam Buckner, we did mention, and Jamal Green. Okay, only reason, folks, is that they don't seem to have enough money to go up and do big TV ads. They don't have a major organization, so most people say it's unlikely, not impossible, that they'll win. So we've put our resources and our time on the top four. We're not supporting those top five. We're just saying it seems likely. I'm saying one of those five is going to get into. Two of those five will get into the runoff on February 28th. Or in February 28th, they get into the runoff. That's on April 4, and one of those five will be the winner.
Look, the way you should look at this is probably take the candidates who is willing to talk about policies that allow Chicago to grow and attract investment in people versus those who are talking about bigger and bigger government, which means bigger taxes. Don't fix the schools. Don't fix crime. Don't fix the CTA. We didn't talk about CTA. Black unemployment in Chicago is horrendous relative to the rest of the country. Talk about equity again. They're failing on jobs. So you got to listen to those candidates who are willing to talk about spending reforms, tax reforms, attracting business, and of course, you got to. Crime is an interesting thing because you got the long-term causes that you have to address. No doubt about that. And from that perspective, there's a lot to be done. But in the short term, you got to stop the bleeding. I guess that's the proper word. You have to stop the bleeding. And so, who's trying to do that in a way that isn't pandering?
Sounds like Paul Vallas and Willie Wilson to me.
Those two guys are certainly the ones that are willing to attack the system more. The rest seem to be perpetuating the system. You measure the metric. If you have 6% of black kids who can read a grade level, you better obsess about getting it to 30 and then 40 and then 50. If you have these crimes we're talking about, you got to obsess about getting them down. And if you don't do that, people are going to keep fleeing. So most of what I heard in the candidate debate doesn't help Chicago, just perpetuates the problem.
So folks, Ted Dabrowski, thank you so much. President of Wirepoints.
Thank you.
Because you're obviously a data person. You're looking at this and say, what are the data? You can find that at wirepoints.org.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say I'm a data person, but you need data to make decisions. And I don't hear any of this data being used and to critique current policy and then how to improve it.
So as people are watching this, there's a month left. All of these top five, won't have to say them again. I will say it again. Lightfoot, top five. Okay, I just mentioned there's a poll that just came out recently. I think it came out on the 19th. We're taping on the 20th. I haven't had time to look deep at the tabs and so forth. It's the second one they've done in this race. M3 Strategies by Matt Pogorski, right? My understanding is puts Vallas in the lead now. This is a front runner, 26%. Chuy Garcia, 19%. Brandon Johnson, 12%. Lori Lightfoot, 10%. Willie Wilson, almost 9%. Okay? So Vallas, Chuy Garcia, Brandon Johnson, Lori Lightfoot, Wilson in those top five. And then you see on those other four, they have collectively about 5%. And I guess the rest is undecided. And with that, you remember to come back next week and every week to Public Affairs.